Metropolitan Police have launched a murder investigation after a 21-year-old man was stabbed to death at the Notting Hill Carnival in London. A number of violent incidents broke out, including several serious stabbings, marring the end of the festival, which was attended by around about 1 million people. The police extended their stop and search powers in the area around Notting Hill last night, and officers are appealing to carnival goers to come forward with information. Joining us now is Minister of State for Department Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, which is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Matthew Warman, let's call him that instead, should we? Good morning to you. Just a thought on what happened at Notting Hill to start with.
Well, it's obviously a tragic event, and to have seen so many people out trying to have a lovely time on a bank holiday weekend, to have ended in this way for at least one individual is obviously a tragedy. But as you see, the police are making some progress, and I'd just concur with their appeal to people if they've got any information to get in touch.
OK, thank you. Talk to us about the cost of living crisis, if you would. Obviously, we'll have more from Notting Hill throughout the course of the programme. We got the price cap figure, didn't we? £3,549. That was from Ofgem. What we didn't get is a plan from the government.
Well, I think what you've seen is a significant amount of help already, up to £1,200 and sometimes beyond for people who need it most. And this will absolutely be at the top of the next Prime Minister's in-tray as well. So there's help there, and there is, I'm sure, going to be help to come.
You acknowledge that much more needs to be done.
Well, I think it's obvious that the package that was put forward a few weeks ago was done in slightly different circumstances, and I think that's why you've seen both leadership candidates lay out, to some extent, the fact that some more needs to be done, yes.
What are we waiting for?
Well, it's right, I think, when we have a Prime Minister due to be put in place, a new Prime Minister due to be put in place on Monday, then it's going to be for them to make the detailed plans that people need to see. I think that's a fair and sensible process.
Why, Minister? Why is that?
Well,
important?
I think the Prime Minister, when he stood down, acknowledged that he wasn't going to...
He's still Prime Minister.
He is still Prime Minister, and that's why he and Nadhim Zahawi have been working on what the options might be. But I do think it's only fair and reasonable that someone who is going to take over in less than a week's time has the right to say, this is how I think it's best to take the country forward through what are going to be immensely challenging times.
The reason is, I make the point, I think I'm right in saying that you support Rishi Sunak. He's talked about hundreds of pounds being made available. But, you know, what does that actually mean? People who are watching this morning, who saw that price cap had gone up to more than £3,500 last Friday, are wondering how they're going to keep their kids warm this winter.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Lots of people, I've had lots of constituents in touch individually with just those sorts of worries. And what they're saying is that they're worried about the uncertainty of what winter is going to look like. And, of course, they've seen those headlines about the new cap. I think, for me, the most important thing is that we target those who need it most. We target the most vulnerable. That's what you saw in that package that differentiates between some people who have greater needs than others, but acknowledge that everybody needs help.
So what constitutes the most vulnerable?
Well, I think pensioners in particular, those on fixed incomes, obviously we need to think about that. We need to think about people who are particularly reliant on benefits. But the fact is, as we heard from the Chancellor not long ago, this is something that is going to affect people somewhat higher up the income scale as well. And that's why the principles of the package that was announced before, I think, are the right ones, which are to focus the help on those who need it most, but also to acknowledge that a degree of universality is the right one.
So middle-income families can expect support as well?
Well, as I say, that will be a matter for the new Prime Minister, but middle-income families got some support already when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor. I would think that those principles should be continued.
Yeah, just looking at, I mean, what the French are doing and what the Spanish are doing, they've already come up with quite a lot of support for people who live in those countries, including a 4% freeze as far as the French are concerned. I think EDF, one of their energy companies, as you know, they're taking an £8.4 billion hit. Spain's agreed to a price cap as well and tax cuts as well. we are just waiting until we see who the next Prime Minister is?
Well, I think you've already seen a windfall tax. You've already seen that significant package of support. I don't disagree with you that there needs to be more to come, and that's why both leadership candidates have been talking about it to such an extent already. And it's why, from the Prime Minister on Sunday, you saw that article talking about what this government has been doing and what more needs to happen as well under his successors.
Would you support a freeze in the energy price cap?
Well, I think it partly depends on what you mean by that, but ultimately
the price of fuel can't go up any higher, of energy can't go up any higher than what it is at the moment. That's been set at £3,549.
Which is already a significant rise, which has been offset to some extent by the package that Rishi Sunak announced. What I support is something that really does, as I say, target those people who are most vulnerable, who need it most, but also acknowledges that there are people who are somewhat higher up that income scale that are going to need genuine help.
So, I'm sorry, did you say that you were supporting a freeze in the energy price cap or not?
No, as I say, what I support is something that
a lot of the energy companies are, of course, aren't they? That's what the energy bosses are saying.
Well, so I think this needs to be something that tackles both the energy supply and energy security challenges that we've got and tackles the problems that people have as individuals paying their own bills. There are a number of different policy ways you might try and get to that conclusion. And as I say, it is right that the next Prime Minister makes those decisions.
Perhaps if we'd had a Prime Minister before now, then we wouldn't still be waiting for what he or she is going to do.
I don't make the rules on how long it's taken to go through this contest, but I think, personally, I would have preferred it had it taken somewhat less time, yes. And I think when the party considers what the rules might look like going forward, that will, I suspect, be something that many people will take an interest in. But that's not a problem that we can address right now. We've got less than a week until a new Prime Minister is in place.
In fact, yeah, next Monday, you're quite right, 5th of September, we should find out who that is. I suppose an easy way around that would have been for your man to have pulled out before now.
Well, I think Rishi is still fighting absolutely for every vote. You're seeing him going out and meeting huge numbers of party members right even up to this moment. And I think, look, this is if you're going to have a contest, it is sensible to have a contest. It was widely pointed out before Boris Johnson stood down how disruptive this process would be. That is deeply regrettable, and it's more true now than ever. But I do think, as I say, less than a week to go, it is what it is right now.
How are you looking back on his reign?
I think, well, for instance, one of the reasons why I'm out today is talking about huge growth in broadband.
That was my cue for you to say
provision, exactly. So I think there's lots of things. In my own constituency, we're getting a huge new A&E. There are lots of things under that levelling up agenda that Boris Johnson, I think, will look back on and be hugely proud of. And that broadband announcement today, we've hit 70% gigabit-capable premises today. That's up from 9% in 2019. That's a huge shift in a very short period, and it comes from the focus that Number 10 delivered.
Why can I never get internet on the train then, Minister?
Internet coverage on railways is a particular challenge. Some of it is down to the design physically of the railways. We have, again, made huge progress on that, and partly...
I've never noticed it.
Well, partly we've put it into the contracts of the train operating companies in some cases, which means that it is a much more important part of their delivery. But I share your frustration on many occasions with that.
Yeah, exactly. Just a final thought. Let's end where we started, should we? Tory voters support nationalising energy firms, at least in the short term. That, according to a YouGov poll, 47%, almost half of Tory voters that were asked, said that we should nationalise the energy firms for now. What do you think?
Well, I think the way that the market has been regulated hasn't worked as well as it could have done in the interests of consumers. I think that what we've got to see is some improvement in a host of issues. For me, I'm not sure whether nationalisation does anything other than borrow a huge amount of money today in order to buy companies that will then have to pay back that borrowing through taxation. So for me, it doesn't work, but I understand the frustration that is at the back of that suggestion, and I think we need to address the concerns that people have rather than necessarily using that device.
How would you address those concerns?
Well, as I say, it's partly about UK energy security. It's partly about investing in nuclear, for instance. You've got the Chancellor over in the US today talking about how we can make sure that nuclear is a greater part of our energy mix. We've got to try and tackle what is a long-standing problem in a lot of different ways.
OK, Minister, it's great to talk to you.
Thank you
for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. Thank you. A quick look at the papers for you. The FT, Financial Times, says the EU is to unveil crisis action on energy, including decoupling electricity prices from the soaring cost of gas. The Eye has an exclusive claiming that Liz Truss' cost of living plan is being delayed because her camp hasn't received enough information from Treasury officials. The Express describes Ms Truss's tax plan as the only way to rescue the economy. According to The Times, the Tory leadership frontrunner plans to approve new oil and gas drilling licences in the North Sea. The Guardian warns of potential school closures after top Conservatives warn soaring energy costs could lead to the school week being reduced. The Metro reports on brewers demanding help with energy bills, warning without support many won't survive. More now on the Met launching a murder investigation after a 21-year-old man stabbed to death at the Notting Hill Carnival in London. Saba's there for us. Hi, Saba, tell us more. Morning.
Good morning, Kay. As you say, a murder investigation is underway. A 21-year-old man was attending the Notting Hill Carnival here in West London, where he was stabbed. Now, police were made aware of a stabbing incident at around 8 p.m. last night, and paramedics arrived at the scene shortly afterwards. They had to waft through crowds of people with great difficulty. There were hundreds of people in the area. The young man was taken to a local hospital shortly afterwards, where he was pronounced dead. Now, there was a Section 60 order that was issued shortly after the incident, and essentially what this means is that police are able to stop and search people without suspicion. Now, the family of this young man have been made aware of his death, and are also he is being assisted by specialist officers. Now, Sky News earlier spoke to an individual from the Metropolitan Police, and this is what she had to say.
There were hundreds of people in the immediate vicinity when this incident took place. I would urge anyone who saw anything, who has video footage or who has any other information that could assist officers, to come forward. Tonight, our thoughts are with the family of the young man who has lost his life in this senseless attack.
The next of kin have been aware, as I mentioned, and police are urgently calling for members of the public who were there to come forward with any video evidence that they may have that will help this investigation.
Okay, thank you. In other news, President Zelensky has warned Russian soldiers that if they want to survive, they should go home. Ukraine says it's broken through the Russian front line in several places in a new counter-offensive. Deborah standing by for us this morning. Hi, Deborah. I heard you breaking this story yesterday on Sky. How's it developed?
Yes, so interestingly this morning, the UK, in its regular update on the state of the war, has said that they believe that several Ukrainian brigades have intensified their artillery strikes since the beginning of yesterday against Russian positions along the south. This is backed up by long-range precision strikes against Russian supply lines and ammunition depots, all part of this offensive, though the UK is keen to stress that it's not yet possible to confirm the extent of any Ukrainian advances. And it also makes this really interesting point about how since the beginning of this month, when speculation has been rife that Ukraine was planning some kind of counter-offensive to recapture this key region of Kherson, particularly the city that's been under Russian control since the beginning, that since the beginning of the month, Russian forces have been reinforcing themselves around that region, clearly preparing to defend themselves. They say that there's been a merger between two different elements of two different districts on the Russian military side, perhaps an attempt to try to have a better performance than they displayed back in the beginning of this war when they failed so badly in their assault on Kyiv. Clearly, whatever happens next will be decisive to see whether this Ukrainian advance can achieve some success.
OK, thank you. A third of Pakistan underwater after flooding that's killed at least 1,000 people and displaced millions of others. The country's government described it as a climate-induced humanitarian disaster of epic proportions. Let's speak now to our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch. Hi, Cordelia. This is just horrific.
It is, Kay. I mean, devastating pictures coming out of Pakistan. You see people trying to traverse these treacherous waters. We've seen bridges that are completely impassable. Lots of the elderly that are trying to cross, wading through the water. More than 1,100 people dead now, Kay. The governments say a third of those are children. People are living in makeshift camps, trying to get their hands on what little food they can. The governments say that it is certainly a climate change catastrophe and a man-made one. There is discussion about who ultimately helps fund support for this and where that money should potentially come from. Pakistan's already been suffering financially. They've been looking at a bailout from the International Monetary Fund recently. This will only add to their woes. And what we're seeing is a whole confluence of things. You've had this heavy rain over 2 months, the likes of which the country hasn't seen since those devastating floods of 2010. Add to that melting glaciers as well. And some people say that the local government is culpable in this, that hotels were able to build on and cut off these river routes. That means that the water's been redirected into villages. There's been some miraculous recoveries, people being rescued and winched up from helicopters in really mountainous areas. But it is incredibly difficult situation for people there with no immediate end in sight. This is going to be deeply costly. They're already saying.
Well, I think we may have lost Cordelia for now. We will return to that story later on in the programme. Of course, 1,000 people having died. A third of Pakistan is said to be underwater, and the authorities blaming climate change as a result of that. Here's our dashboard, and many of you will have seen it a couple of times already by now this week. The top left-hand side, that's the figure that we use, how much warmer the planet is since 1880, up by 1.25 degrees and counting. The CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes, that according to the University of Oxford. Then on the right-hand side, you can see how much fuel, a real-time power mix we're using at the moment. So the amount of fuel that we're using, almost 55% of that is coming from our gas supply. At the moment, we're importing 2% of our fuel, and on we go. Still to come on the programme for you. Soon we'll be talking to a young Pakistani climate activist about the floods, a disaster that has all the hallmarks of a climate emergency. At 20 to 8, we'll speak to a brewery boss who's warning that his industry is being crippled by rocketing costs. And just after that, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, that's Andy Burnham, will tell us about a cost of living rally. He'll be at today's so-called Enough is Enough rally. At least 15 protesters have been killed after violence broke out in the Iraqi capital of Baghdad after an influential Shia cleric announced he was stepping away from politics. Muqtada al-Sadr's party won the largest share of seats in last October's parliamentary elections, but refused to negotiate with rivals, leading to months of political deadlock. Mr al-Sadr's resignation prompted hundreds of his supporters to storm the government palace. Police in Liverpool have made more than 30 arrests in 24 hours as part of a crackdown on organised crime following the fatal shooting of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Merseyside police have also carried out over 60 stop and searches and seized 8 vehicles. Research out today shows 474 GP surgeries have closed in the UK since 2013, leaving 1.5 million patients having to go elsewhere. GP magazine Pulse says smaller practices have been far more likely to shut down, and these are the ones patients prefer. People in parts of Scotland face yet another day without bin collections after talks between unions and local authorities once again collapsed. GMB and Unite have rejected the latest pay deal, so as it stands, 2/3 of Scotland's councils will be on strike for the second round of industrial action next week. The bosses of 6 of the UK's biggest pub and brewery companies have written an open letter to the government. They warn of mass closures if the industry doesn't help with energy bills. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso has spoken to one worried pub owner.
We're certainly looking at probably 250 to 300% increase in electric and gas over the next 6 months.
At the Red Lion in Cricklade, the energy bills are going up as the pints slip down.
We're around about £2,000 a month, give or take, for electricity. That's going to go up to about £1,000 a week.
Tenant landlord Darren is among thousands of publicans worried that rising energy costs for his business, suppliers and customers might hasten last orders.
COVID was tough, but I don't think it's going to be anything as tough as what we've got coming. You know, at least during COVID we could still do which we did, our takeaways and all that sort of thing. But that's all out of our hands now. It's all down to prices way above us.
6 of the UK's largest pub and brewing companies have written to ministers warning that without help, many of their tenants may be calling time this winter. It comes as new figures show 4 in 10 hospitality businesses say energy prices are their biggest worry, with 2/3 having already been affected by rises and over half absorbing extra costs.
We're desperately calling for action from the government to give us an energy cap for small businesses and to do a long-term plan with hospitality so we can save pubs and brewers at the heart of our communities by making sure they're taking action to give them essential headroom like cutting VAT, business rates and, of course, keeping beer duty low.
The government says energy prices are beyond its control and pubs have benefited from rate relief and duty freezes on beer, cider and wine. But as the sun sets on a vintage beer garden summer, they see little reason for cheer. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Let's get more now on Ukraine's offensive to try to push Russian forces back in the south of the country and retake the city of Kherson. Ed Arnold is a research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the acronym, and is with us now. Hello to you, Mr. Arnold. Thanks for joining us on the programme. What's going on with Kherson?
So at the moment, yesterday, the Ukrainian government announced the decisive phase of their counter-offensive. We've been expecting this for a number of months, and the shaping or preparatory activity has been ongoing for around 2 months, where Ukraine has targeted Russian positions, ammunition supplies to try and degrade their artillery strengths, and also bridges over the Dnieper River, which is just to the east of Kherson city. So now what we're going to expect to see is a large-scale Ukraine counter-offensive to take at least the city of Kherson and potentially more territory to the east of the river into the region.
So why is Kherson so important?
Well, Kherson's important because politically it was one of the first places taken by the Russian forces at the start in February, and also politically significant because the Ukrainian government and President Zelensky has to show the West that he is able to use all of these Western-supplied weapon systems to actually take back territory. So that is really important. And at the moment, once Kherson, at least the city, is in Ukrainian control, that means that there's no Russian forces to the north or west of the Dnieper River, which essentially dissects the whole of Ukraine. It protects Mykolaiv and Odessa further down the coast. It puts a lot of pressure on Russian forces in the south and particularly Crimea. And part of that roadway, if you will, down to Crimea? Mm-hmm. Exactly that. So it'll start to push Russian forces back. Ukraine had significant victories in the early part of the war. They were then under a lot of pressure in the east in the last 4 months. So this would be a very strategic win for Ukraine. And obviously in terms of the timeframes, not that war fighting will completely end during the winter, but during the months in the next sort of 3 months, the war will start to sort of subside. So Ukraine needs to show that they can take back territory now and secure that Western support for ongoing offensives that will happen over the coming years. What you say that obviously fighting will stop, hand-to-hand fighting on the ground will stop, but shelling of nuclear plants may well continue. How concerned are we about that? Very concerned at the moment, and President Zelensky messaged last week to say that he was very concerned in terms of the reactors. The IAEA, from a team from the UN, is deployed to Ukraine at the moment to try and get to the site to essentially assess the safety of it. But the Ukrainian population are obviously very concerned. They've started to give iodine tablets out to civilians within the area. So that is one issue that the international community is very concerned about as this counter-offensive starts in the south.
And as far as the IAEA is concerned, I mean, we heard about them a lot during the Iraq war. We haven't heard so much about them, particularly in the headlines, too much of late. International Atomic Energy Agency. I heard a representative speaking on the radio over the weekend saying this is probably the toughest gig they've ever had, including Iraq.
Well, it's very difficult, and also they are going into a live conflict zone. A lot of the nuclear assessments that they usually do are not in the conflict zone, so it's going to be very difficult to actually get the teams in there, and also whether Russia will try and stall to get the teams in there at the moment. You know, it's Russian forces that have the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant at the moment, and essentially using it as a potentially a political bargaining tool and being quite obstructive.
Sure. What's their job if and when they do get in?
Well, they need to assess the plant, check its structural integrity, check what the risk is, because at the moment we just do not know. They need to understand how they can try and isolate the plant from the wider war, because essentially if something happens with that, the reactor and the plant, that's going to be very, very destructive for Ukraine as a whole, and you know, the subsequent support that would be needed to Ukraine, again, in a war zone, will be incredibly difficult. So the international community's focus really now is trying to stabilise that plant and ultimately trying to create a ring around it so military forces can leave and then more civilian personnel can come in to stabilise that plant.
And just to clarify before I let you go, that is within the remit of the IAEA. They can say, OK, we need to neutralise this area, guys.
No, they can recommend it. What would then need to happen is probably starting with the UN, but ultimately trying to find a body that can have a resolution to try and create a demilitarised zone around that. You know, again, these are all very difficult conversations. It might have to be protected by another military force, which would be, again, very difficult. Obviously, Russia sits on the UN Security Council. So these are some of the issues that are going to drag on for the coming months, again, with a large-scale counter-offensive happening in the south. So it's a very critical time.
Good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Much appreciated. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you, we'll have all today's top stories and indeed the very latest on the cost of living crisis. Do stay tuned. Hello again, everybody. You're watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Tuesday Morning Top Stories. Police have launched a murder investigation after a 21-year-old man was stabbed to death during a violent end to the Notting Hill Carnival. Government Minister Matt Warman says more needs to be done to deal with the cost of living crisis, insisting it will be at the top of the next Prime Minister's in-tray. Ukraine says it's broken through the Russian front line in several places during a long-awaited counter-offensive. Russia, though, says it repelled the assault. Earlier this morning, Rishi Sunak supporter and Culture Minister Matt Warman told Sky News that the vulnerable will be a priority this winter, but concedes help will be needed across the board.
What they're saying is that they're worried about the uncertainty of what winter is going to look like. And, of course, they've seen those headlines about the new cap. I think, for me, the most important thing is that we target those who need it most. We target the most vulnerable. That's what you saw in that package that differentiates between some people who have greater needs than others, but acknowledge that everybody needs help.
But when, Tamara?
Well, not yet, not till the next Prime Minister is in, which is now next Monday, so not that long to go. But I think the concern, even being openly admitted by ministers, is that the public have been left in limbo, knowing where energy bills are going, but not what support they will get from either contender. He was saying, the minister there, who's supporting Rishi Sunak, that whoever gets in will bring more help with them. Perhaps that is a sign that Rishi Sunak supporters are now reconciling themselves to what the outcome is expected to be, which is that Liz Truss is expected to triumph next week. What sort of support? Neither side have really said. There are various ideas coming out of the Truss camp over the weekend, including a cut in VAT, which of course would not be targeted at the poorest people. So little sense there about what she's planning. The minister there said people like pensioners and those on fixed incomes like benefits will need some help. But he also talked about further up the income spectrum, but not where that line would be drawn. So still very much in the dark, with suggestions by the Liz Truss camp that they don't know enough yet from the Treasury to make those sorts of decisions. So the next Prime Minister will be in place before we know. The current Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, is going to Washington this week, and he will be talking to US Treasury officials and central bankers about international solutions to the energy crisis. How far that will get him when he's not expected to be in a job by next week is not clear, and Labour say he should start by listening to people here at home.
Yeah, he's there already, I think, talking about nuclear opportunities. But interesting, the Minister suggesting that actually, as far as he was concerned, the race for the next Prime Minister has taken too long.
Yes, that was interesting. Of course, the timetable set by the Conservative Party's 1922 committee, and because it was running over the summer, perhaps the suggestion is that it was let run too long. And he certainly said it will be something for the party to pick up next time, this idea that spending weeks being buffeted by events, especially when you've got this cost of living crisis already setting in, is something to learn from in the future, and perhaps is not reflected well on the Conservative Party, either in terms of how far the two candidates have attacked each other or just how long it has left the country in limbo for. I thought that was a pretty strong indication that he certainly thought it was too long.
Yeah, blowing in the wind. We'll see you for tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock. Look forward to it. Thank you. Now to a warning that pubs could be closing their doors for good. The heads of 6 of the largest pub and brewing companies have warned that the industry urgently needs government support or faces mass closures and irreversible damage due to rising energy prices. Andrew Turner, he's the Chief Operating Officer at the St Austell Brewery. He's with us now. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. How bad is it?
Yeah, it's going to potentially be pretty catastrophic, is the word you said. Unlike consumers, there is no energy price cap for small businesses, and therefore we're seeing spiralling costs for our tenants, for our pubs, for our breweries right across the industry. Totally wiping out the profits they're making, which questions why on earth that they would bother to open the doors going forward. It's really disappointing that the government, positive, the government supported us through the pandemic, and we got through that, in a fairly good state. And now we're facing another crisis, and without further support, all the good work that happened during the pandemic is going to be completely unwound.
So what do you need the next Prime Minister to do to help you guys?
It would be helpful to have somebody at the top, first of all, to make some decisions. That would be the first step. But what we're asking for is an energy price cap for small businesses, and we're asking for grants to support many of the pubs up and down the country. You'll remember when people think about pubs, they just think about walking into a pub and having a pint. But these are also the hearts of many communities, important for the sort of social fabric that the UK has grown up on. And also these people, it's not just their businesses, for many of them, it's their homes. And whilst they live upstairs, again, they do not get the benefit of a consumer price cap. It is really serious for communities, for publicans and for small businesses.
How does it compare to the challenges during the pandemic, or does this just compound what you're already seeing over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's been a pretty tough, couple of years, 2.5 years for the industry. I think we came out of it pretty well, again, thanks to the government's support. And we were rebuilding, post the pandemic. At the moment, it feels like we're sort of sat in the ether a bit. Clearly, there is no significant leadership at the top to make decisions. Again, we need that to happen so that we can have some decisions made. But at the moment, the energy price is spiraling. We had an example last week where one of our tenants saw over a 400% increase in their energy bills, and it just wipes out any profit they are making. I mean, as I said before, it's just there's no point in them opening the doors. So it feels at the moment we're a bit in the dark, and we need government to step forward to make some decisions to support our sector. And keep what is a cornerstone of the UK business going over this tough time. It's another situation, unfortunately, like the pandemic, which is completely outside of our control.
It's good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay.
Thanks a lot. The Royal Navy's largest aircraft carrier, which sailed from Portsmouth yesterday following delays due to technical problems, has broken down off the coast of the Isle of Wight, as we said over the weekend. Divers inspecting HMS Prince of Wales with reports suggesting the vessel's propeller shaft is damaged. The ship was just hours into a landmark mission to the US when she broke down. Here's Sadia.
A £3 billion warship, the pride of the Royal Navy. But for most of Bank Holiday Monday, HMS Prince of Wales was stranded off the south coast.
Shortly after the ship sailed on Saturday, a mechanical fault was discovered with the starboard shaft. I've been to the ship today to see for myself what the issue is and how we in the Royal Navy can work together to make sure that the ship can successfully return to her tasking. After an initial assessment, it's likely that the fault will require repairs which may impact the ship's programme.
This was the vessel's celebratory departure on Saturday, delayed by a day due to a technical issue. It was then supposed to spend 3 months travelling to New York, Canada and the Caribbean, conducting training exercises with the Navy's Western Atlantic counterparts. We're about 5 miles off the coast, and there she is, a 65,000-ton warship. The HMS Prince of Wales is one of the Navy's most prized vessels, and now in need of repair.
It's always embarrassing when one of your major fleet units breaks down. I don't think we know the extent of what has happened yet. As I think we've seen, it may be a major or a minor fault. We don't like our warships coming out of the front line, if you like, to be rectified.
Several smaller boats appear to be involved in the vessel's return to a different anchorage, where the Navy says further inspections can take place. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News, on the Isle of Wight.
The Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, is travelling to the US this week to meet with American bankers and officials to work on joint solutions to the cost of living crisis. The Treasury says they'll discuss energy security, financial services and soaring prices. At home, abortion pills will be made permanently available to women in England and Wales from the end of the month. So-called pills by post were made temporarily available at the start of the pandemic. Good news for tea drinkers. Those who have more than 2 cups a day are likely to live longer than non-tea drinkers. That's according to a study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, which found positive effects no matter whether you take it black, with milk or with sugar. NASA says a second attempt at the Artemis 1 moon rocket launch is still possible this Friday. The first test flight of a project to send humans back to the moon was postponed yesterday due to a problem with one of its engines. Here's Debbie Blevins from Cape Canaveral.
This is Artemis Launch Control with an update. Launch Director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson has called a scrub for today.
History will have to wait. Just 3 minutes into the launch window, she made the call. Huge disappointment for those gathered along the Space Coast for a glimpse of Artemis 1.
I'm pretty bummed. I drove from Minnesota, but I had a backup plan, you know? We're at the beach, can't complain.
How disappointed are you?
Very, because it's my birthday. This sucks.
You traveled 10 hours to get here.
Yes, 10 hours from Alabama.
So how big a deal is this for you?
It's a huge deal. It was like the biggest rocket ever.
You've got Artemis t-shirts. You must be really into this project.
Yes, we are.
What is it that excites you about it? Is it the fact that it's a woman will go to the moon?
Absolutely.
A person who's
Absolutely.
of colour going to the moon?
Absolutely. I think that's huge, especially for our children, you know, just to see something like that.
The Vice President, Kamala Harris, had already arrived at Kennedy Space Center, hoping to witness America's first step towards putting humans back on the moon. But a fuel leak and engine conditioning issues grounded the spacecraft on Launchpad 39B.
This is a brand new rocket. It's not going to fly until it's ready. Space flight is risky. That's what you do. You buy down that risk. You make it as safe as possible. And of course, that is the whole reason for this test flight.
The Artemis program aims to put the first woman and first person of colour on the moon by 2025 and establish a permanent base there from which humans might one day visit Mars. It will be the most consequential launch in a generation when it happens.
This is about learning about how one day we can go further, and that is the exciting thing. Whether or not we use the moon as a base or what's called a gateway, a sort of a spacecraft that's in orbit around the moon, we can use those two parts of this Artemis mission to learn much more about what we need to do.
This launch has been 10 years in the making, so what's another few days? When you need £8.8 million of thrust to lift a spacecraft off the ground, everything has to be just right. If it isn't, they'll be wasting billions of dollars. Writing a new chapter in space exploration is a costly business. They'll be hoping this is one small delay and not one giant setback. David Blevins, Sky News at Cape Canaveral, Florida.
We see what he did there. They're going to try again, as David was saying, on Friday. Of course, we'll update you as soon as we have more on that. I think there's another window on Monday after that, and then not for quite a long time. Sean the Sheep is waiting in anticipation. Apparently, he's going to be on board. We'll have more on that, as I said, in the coming hours and days. More now on the cost of living crisis, which has engulfed the country, and the Tory leadership campaign. Joining us now is the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Hello to you, Mr Burnham. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. You're taking part in a rally, I think, today called Enough is Enough. It has been criticised for being too broad. What is it?
Well, I think those words, Kay, enough is enough, are words that many people in Greater Manchester are using right now. I've been going around this weekend. I was at a homeless charity yesterday. People are scared. People are genuinely scared about what's coming. And when they look around, they don't see how things are fair. You know, they kind of see the cost of the essentials, water, gas, electric, buses, trains, you know, have gone through the roof. They see the bosses of those companies getting massive payouts, and the workers, people who work within those organisations, haven't got enough to live on. I think people are starting to question a lot, basically, of how things have been organised in this country in recent years, and they want change. I think the public are ahead of the politicians, actually. They're ahead of it in terms of seeing the scale of the cost of living crisis, but also the change that's needed if we're to get through it fairly. And that's what tonight's rally is about. And I'll be pleased to welcome it to Manchester because, you know, from my point of view, I start with the residents of Greater Manchester. They are looking for people to speak up for them and to call for the big change that's needed. And that's what they're hearing from the Enough is Enough campaign.
Who do you expect to attend?
Lots of people are coming, actually, all walks of life. I think it's something that is capturing the sort of moment. As I say, we need people to wake up to the scale of this. And I think that's the call that will be going out from tonight. And, you know, I would say to all my colleagues in Westminster, my old colleagues, I think we need to start approaching the cost of living crisis like we did the early stages of the pandemic, where the parties came together and started to think of interventions that perhaps they wouldn't think of in normal times, where key workers were recognised and properly respected and rewarded. You know, I heard a Conservative MP, Mr Gullis, on the media at the weekend, demonising greedy rail workers in his words. Well, I'm sorry, but that is just not good enough. These are the people that he was clapping, that everyone was clapping a few years ago. You know, we need to recognise that people are going to need fair pay rises if they're going to keep Britain running through what is going to be a really challenging time.
You are, of course, happy to share the stage with the union leader, Mick Lynch. Would you be happy to share a picket line with him?
I would. And, you know, I don't see this as, you know, controversial. You know, people are fighting for their incomes in a cost of living crisis. And so, of course, you've got to kind of recognise the point that they are making. They're going to work, but they don't have enough to live on. And in calling for the parties to approach this like the pandemic, I would say particularly to the government, and if it is to be Liz Truss who's the next Prime Minister, get round the table. We've had a summer of, you know, politicking really, you know, making the unions responsible for everything and, you know, kind of all kinds of unhelpful rhetoric. You need to get round the table, and there needs to be sector by sector deals here that are fair to people, but also keep the country running. And if people ask how that's to be paid for, what I would say, Kay, is we need now to open up a debate on the culture of high and excessive pay in the top half of organisations. This has gone on and on and on over the last couple of decades, where the gap between those at the bottom and those at the top has just got bigger and bigger. There was research last week that says in the FTSE 100 companies, on average, the pay of those at the top is 109 times higher than the pay of those at the bottom. I mean, that is why people are saying enough is enough.
What about energy companies and energy bosses? Should energy companies in the UK be nationalised for now, taken back into public ownership?
Well, there's certainly a case for more public control, more public ownership of essential utilities. You know, I've listened to the leadership debate in the Tory party this summer, and they've both been promising more Thatcherism. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that is what got us into the mess that we're in right now. When we sold off the water, sold off the electricity, sold off the gas, sold off the council homes, sold off the buses, sold off the trains, we found ourselves in a position where ordinary people can't afford those basics anymore, those essentials. And therefore, change is needed in the way that we provide those essential services. Everybody needs the basics. Everybody needs to be able to afford the basics. And this just isn't talk, Kay. I've taken the decision to put buses back under public control in Greater Manchester after 36 years of deregulation. On Monday, this coming Monday, we will introduce a fare cap in Greater Manchester, a cap of £2 on a single adult fare. So we are taking steps that we can. You know, the talk that I've heard this summer of more deregulation, more privatisation, that has left us in a position where we've had chaos on our trains, buses that people can't afford, and raw sewage on our beaches. And that is why change is needed.
Two policies there that you are completely opposite to what Keir Starmer has suggested, people on politicians on the picket lines, and then also the nationalisation of the energy companies. Is he the right man for the job?
I didn't hear that question. I'm sorry, you froze on me there.
No, I'm very sorry. I'll say it again. Tuesday morning, just having my first cup of tea. And you know what Northerners are like with their tea. I was making the point that you've two policies there that are directly opposite to what we've heard from Sir Keir Starmer. One of them is about politicians being on the picket lines. He doesn't think that's a good idea, senior politicians, which of course you are. And the second one is nationalising energy companies. Initially, we heard Labour thought that was a good idea. Now they seem to have backtracked. Is he the right man for the job, was the question.
Yes, he is. And I think what you can see is the support for him in the polls is making that clear. He did intervene in the summer with the policy of a price freeze, and that is a very good start. I would say there is a case to go further, as I've said this morning. In terms of, you said I'm saying different things. Well, I'm in a different job. I'm not in Westminster, Kay. I've just got a role to speak up for Greater Manchester, and that's different to any politician in Westminster. So I will come to different judgments. As I look at it right now, when I listen to people in Greater Manchester who tell me they're scared about what's coming, who tell me that already they've turned every appliance off in their home and they're cooking via their microwave and nothing else, it's my job to respond to what they're saying and actually then put forward policies that I think will support them. There is strong public support for what the Enough is Enough campaign is saying on all of the policies that they're putting forward. And it's my job, if you like, from the outside to speak up for the residents of Greater Manchester. Everyone always thinks that whenever you do anything, it's an internal political game. Well, it's not. I think we're beyond any kind of time for those kind of things. This is a massive crisis, the scale of which we've not faced before. It will require politicians to do different things, to intervene in markets to protect people. And it's really important that I use my voice to say that and hopefully give people the space to come forward and work out plans that will get the country through this.
Do you support people joining Don't Pay UK?
Well, that at this stage is definitely a step that I wouldn't support. You know, we've got to live within the rule of law, haven't we? We've got to keep a country where people respect the norms and respect the way of doing things. I understand why people are saying it, but I wouldn't in any way recommend that that's the way that people should go. What we need is action to make things affordable for people. But I do feel that kind of call will increase unless we see the scale of action that is going to be needed.
Paul Franks has emailed me this morning just before I let you go. He says, "Morning, Kay. Can you ask Andy Burnham, would he consider running for leader of the Labour Party, then ultimately Prime Minister? Regards, Paul."
I have said one day if that were ever something that would be something people would support, but not now, because we've got a leader of the Labour Party who is providing leadership in the cost of living crisis, and I'm happy to give my full support to Kay. And I've got a job to do in Greater Manchester, Kay. You know, I am making big changes to public transport, which hopefully will help people through this, and that's where my full focus is right now.
But you're not ruling it out there, are you?
Well, I've just been honest. I mean, in the future, you know, I've said I'll serve a full second term as Mayor of Greater Manchester. If at some point way beyond at this point where we are, that was something that was a possibility, I would consider it. But I'm just focused on what I'm doing right now. We're putting in place a whole range of support to help people through this crisis. That should be the sole focus of politicians right now. I think the people who are vying to be leader of the Tory party, the ones that need to be answering questions right now, you know, they've spent the summer, I think, in a comfort zone, talking to their own party, giving them the kind of answers they want to hear. But actually, those are the things that got us into this mess in the first place. And I think if it is to be Liz Truss, she will need to make some big changes and big moves very quickly if she is to come into this role and help the country through this. So it's not about the future now, is it? It's about today and who's going to give people the reassurance that they're looking for.
Yeah, nice sort of body swerve at the end there. The Wigan's front row would be proud of you. It's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.
They lost yesterday, but never mind. Thanks
I know,
a lot,
I saw. They won the last one, though. The one before that, I should say. It's good to talk to you. Thank you. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Next few days, mostly fine, turning unsettled to end the week.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Just want to show you this. It's all gravy. They're just missing some giant Yorkshire pudding to go with this giant pool of gravy. Men and women came to wrestle at the World Gravy Wrestling Championships in Lancashire yesterday. Look at them. Yeah, Northern boys love gravy. We'll see you at the top of the hour.